As season 5 is on its last week, we are going international to interview an advocate in Scotland, the host of another powerful mental health podcast that focuses on the mindset in Empowered. This has been an incredibly inspiring season as advocates and professionals have shared their most vulnerable moments to help you improve your lives. Thank you for listening to A Mental Health Break. I'm your host and author of the book, Mr. Lancey Talks Mental Health, Vincent A. Lancey. Each week on this platform, I interview a different mental health professional or advocate from around the country and across the globe to share their story relating to mental health. I launched this platform when I came to a turning point in my life. When I was 21 years old, I was the victim of a hit-and-run accident while on foot. After coming out of a coma and suffering from a traumatic brain injury, or you may know of as a TBI, I soon realized it was time to prioritize my mental health, and that led me to creating this series. And before I introduce this week's guest, I have some exciting news to share with you all. This summer's episodes will be brought to you by Tampa Counseling and Wellness, dedicated to helping individuals looking to positively transform their lives through compassionate counseling and wellness coaching. If you struggle with depression, anxiety, or other mental health issues, call today for a free consultation. Tampa Counseling and Wellness, therapy that inspires change, and you can find their info in today's episode description, whether you want in-person visits or virtual assistance. I am excited to launch my guest with this week's episode as he is filled with passion about breaking stigmas. We've connected on social media recently, and I noticed his profile after he continued to support my page. And he's big into self-empowerment, and his lessons learned in the mental health world will help shape you. Along with his positivity, it's going to help make this week one of your happiest yet. So allow me to now bring on Gary Tickle. Gary, thank you so much for joining the show.
Vincent, thanks for having me on, brother. I appreciate it. I'm super excited to dive into some of the topics today because I know that we are both passionate about them, and I hope that your listeners can decipher my Scottish accent.
I think they'll be able to. And now, would you mind introducing yourself briefly to our listeners and sharing your part of your story before we dive in, and also share your role relating to mental health?
Sure. So I guess my story started in Edinburgh, Scotland. That's where I'm from, and I had a pretty good upbringing. I feel like my parents have done a good job, and I'm very sporty growing up, very sporty. And about 18 or 19, I started a marketing business that I thought, right, Vincent, this is it. This is my ticket out of the 9 to 5, the ticket out of the rat race. I'm going to try this. I don't know what my expectations were, but they weren't met. That business failed miserably. And then I sort of descended into a spiral of, I'd say, some negative thinking, some anxious thinking. And I went through that for I don't know, man, over a year. And it got to the point where I was like, enough is enough. Mm-hmm. I took it upon myself to start researching. Just anything I could get my hands on, I would consume it, try and apply it. Things didn't work. Some things worked for a period of time, but I was struggling to find something that I could sustainably rely on to overcome the thought patterns that I was going through on a day-to-day basis. And that led me to start meditation. And that eventually led me to start a podcast that I said that I was going to do for ages. And I kept putting it off. And my first couple episodes on the podcast were just documenting my process going through Dr. Joe Dispenza, his program. And that was how it started, mate. That just spiraled from there. And it's took on different forms, some different names. But the premise of EMPWRD Radio is to expand the thinking, enrich the spirit, and empower the mindset of millennials and beyond.
Well, you're doing a great service to millennials and beyond by sharing your story. Thank you for sharing a great preview of what we're going to expect, because the listeners now see that there is personal experience coming behind what you're about to share, something you share most likely will resonate with someone out there, Gary. So now we'll get into really what you experienced. As many agree, there's mood disorders, anxiety disorders, schizophrenia disorders. That's what we hear the most, at least I should say. What did you experience the most? And then maybe we'll talk about what you experienced from your listeners on your platform.
Sure. So the thing that I feel looking back in it, you know, they say hindsight's 2020. So looking back on that period of my life, I'd say coming off the back of that adventure of trying to build a business, trying to be successful, trying to escape that rat race, and it failed, and I felt like that dream just poured through my hands like sand. And then I got to the point I was like, Vincent, what can I do? What can I put my passion into? And it wasn't apparent at first, and I got myself into this mode of thinking that was a bit strange compared to earlier on in my life. I knew that something wasn't quite in sync. So I said that I was going to start a podcast in November 2019. It took me a full year to release my first episode. So I'm thinking, how on earth has it took me that long? And looking back on it, I was just on a cycle of procrastinating. And then the procrastinating was leading to me thinking about the situation. And then when I was thinking about the situation, I was overthinking the situation. From overthinking it, I went back to procrastinating, and it was just this cycle. And I definitely felt feelings of anxiousness during that. I felt unsettled when I shouldn't have really been unsettled. And that's probably the thing that I can remember most, is feelings of anxiety, the fear of people judging me, maybe judging my voice or the thing that I say. And I was really scared to put myself on that public platform to be scrutinized by other individuals. And I knew, now knowing what I know, that was completely unfounded, Vincent, completely.
Well, thank you for such an honest answer. I can certainly relate to some anxiety with my podcast, as we talked about before the episode, when I was running low in inventory at times, because I had these goals of keeping it going, and I would start to get very, very anxious about it. I put off doing a podcast for a while. I always knew that I wanted to supplement my book somehow, so maybe a podcast would be a good idea. I did not know that this show would be going into 5 seasons, let alone past 1 season. So a special shout out again to everyone listening on. Special shout out to all the guests I've had the great opportunity to bring on this show. And Gary, now we're going to look not just about what you experienced, but when these new emotions, when these new feelings led you to finally take a stance on mental health advocacy. You mentioned this podcast as a byproduct of that. What was the early signs or the early start?
The early start, I feel like it came from first realizing and being self-aware of who I actually was. So I had this idea of who I thought I was, and it wasn't until I started sitting down and being solely in my own company, meditating. And that came after a book by Dr. Joe Dispenza, who I mentioned earlier on, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. Yeah. That was the book that done it for me, Vincent. That was the one that I thought, right, I'm going to take action on this. I've read other self-help books, but this one I'm taking action on. And the early start really came from understanding more about who I was as a person. I feel like that's where I think you'll be able to relate to that, because I feel like that's where it starts.
You have to really get real with yourself. You know who you are. Do what makes you happy. Find what you enjoy doing. What do you like? What don't you like? If you do things you don't like, you're going to continue to feel, as you said, the spiral of negative emotions and negative feelings. You want to put your mind in the right position to succeed. You know, Gary, you've had to have something that worked for you along this way. So I'm going to have to ask you for 2. And I say just 2 because I want your 2 most important answers for both short-term and long-term basis. What can you offer to our listeners as solutions to improve their mental health?
Sure. So I'll start off with the short term, and something that really, really helped me break out of the cycles that I was getting myself into was actually something pretty simple. It was cold showers. seems so simple, seems too good to be true, but I swear to God, Vincent, that is the thing that unleashed the shackles, if in a sense. Something so simple as getting in a cold shower. For me, personally, what it done is it was a personal battle that I could take on a day-to-day basis against the feelings of my own anxiousness. So I'd step into that cold shower, and the first thing that comes to mind is get out of here. So actively putting yourself in that and fighting against that response, I feel like that had a ripple effect on so many different aspects of my life that I'm still actually coming to terms with.
Well, I love it because you're telling our listeners, put yourself in an uncomfortable situation and see the good that comes out of it. I'm not going to lie. I like my showers very, very hot. So that would be challenging for me. But what else do you have to go offer our listeners?
Yeah. So long-term basis, I'd ask you to maybe think about who you're spending the most time with. It's my opinion, and a lot of other people agree, is that you are a culmination of the 9 to 12 people you spend the most time with. So thinking with that in mind, who are you spending the most time with? Are they negative people? Are they positive people? Are they ambitious people? Are they settled people? Who are that? Who is the people who you spend the most time with? If they're someone who you feel like brings you down, they decrease your vibration, decrease your frequency, maybe consider spending less time with them. And I feel like over the long term,
yes, absolutely,
you're sort of get that you'll pick up good habits from other people through pure osmosis, through pure proximity. That's another big one for me.
You're giving a lot of great advice here today, Gary. Thank you for that. You're keeping things simple, and that's what you need to do when things are getting hectic, things are getting crazy. You need to get back to your baseline, take a deep breath, and put it into simple terms. Get ready for some good analysis here because we're about to have Gary give his input on the Spotlight story. Everyone knows who listens to this platform. For everyone new listening on, though, each week I share a mental health story of someone who is famous because I want to let you, the listeners, know you are not alone. Remember, even though someone looks healthy from the outside, they may not be on the inside too. For today, we're going to look into the story of another male mental health advocate in Zayn Malik. I learned he is an extremely popular singer-songwriter, and his story is a perfect testament to no matter how successful you become, it may not guarantee pure happiness as he struggles heavily with anxiety. He's been very open about his personal struggles with anxiety for a long time, and I commend that because of how far it goes when celebrities use their platforms to resonate with their fans. In 2016, the singer canceled a performance at the Capitol Summertime Ball due to an anxiety attack. And with his disparities, he's vocal about his disparities here, Gary, so he put out a tweet saying he canceled the gig, and this is his terms. Could not be more powerful. To all those people who have been waiting to see me perform at the Capitol Summertime Ball today, I flew into the UK last night to appear in my home country in front of my family, friends, and most importantly, my UK fans. Unfortunately, my anxiety has haunted me throughout the last few months around live performances has got the better of me. With the magnitude of the event, I have suffered the worst anxiety of my career. I cannot apologize enough, but I want to be honest with everyone who has patiently waited to see me. I promise I will do my best to make this up to everyone I've let down today. I know those who suffer anxiety will understand, and I hope those who don't can empathize my situation. That was his quote. I really do think that's so powerful. And his girlfriend's model, Gigi Hadid, she went on Twitter to support his decision at the time to put his mental health first ahead of his career. Gary, what's your take on this story?
My take on this story, Vincent, is that even the members in our society who we might view as being a superstar or supremely confident still have the same struggles that me and you do, the average person. Mm-hmm. He still has the same struggles as we do. And another thing it says to me is that even though he might have X amount of wealth, X amount of money in the bank, does it matter if your happiness isn't there? I don't feel like it does. There's a saying that goes around is that, I'd rather cry in my Ferrari than be happy in my or whatever, right?
Right.
That is completely bonkers. That is completely that to me is nuts. But the main thing that stands out from that spotlight story, Vincent, is that everyone has the same. Everyone has struggles, no matter what, where you are in society. People have the same struggles, and hopefully he was put in a place or found a place where he can that something worked for him to combat that or understand it better and do battle against it when they feelings start to pop up. And if he did, we already found out that he is human because he has the same emotions. Then if he fixed that and he found a solution that worked for him, then you can too.
Well put. What works for some does not work for everyone. There is something out there that will work for you. You agree with that, Gary?
100%. And when you find that, stick to it. If it works, stick to it. For some people, it might be meditation. For other people, it might be running, might be hiking. It could be anything. But if you find something that works for you, stick to it.
Well said. You heard how encouraging he is. He's challenging you to stick with it, find something and do it. So with that, I got to thank you so much for coming on today, Gary. I know everyone will see the value in everything you said. I loved how you were honest right in the beginning where you found your startup. You had this business. It was going well, but then it crashed. You hit a downward spiral. That's going to relate to a lot of people because, more importantly, Gary, you got out of that downward spiral. And I'm looking at you right now. You're smiling. You're wearing the Empowered sweatshirt. You have a lot good going on. As I mentioned, you kept it simple with your 2 techniques, challenged you to step outside your comfort zone, something like a cold shower. It's free to try. See if it works for you. You may have just opened up a whole new light for you. I'm going to ask you for your last word, though, now, Gary. I do this on all my shows because I want the listeners to really have the opportunity to get to know you. What would you like to end on?
Sure. Something I'd like to end on, Vincent, is something that I found really, really inspiring. And it's a quote, I can't remember exactly who by, but it goes like, the quickest way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. To me, that is in a nutshell how I try to live my life and how I encourage other people. You're more powerful than you can ever imagine. You're the writer of your own reality. Just tapping into your true nature of being your full expression of yourself can have so many positive outcomes in your life and in your mental health.
Man, I didn't expect anything less than that last word. Thank you so much. Now, please tell the listeners how to find you, how to find your podcast, how to find anything you have going on.
Sure. So I'll start with the podcast. The podcast is EMPWRD Radio, spelled EMPWRD space radio. That's available on wherever you get your podcasts, whatever podcast platform of choice. And I'm mostly active on my Instagram page, which is empowered.radio. Or my personal page is gary.tickle. I also have a website in the making, which is www.emp-wrd.com. So yeah, that's where you can check me out.
If you love today's episode, reach out to Gary. He's a great guy. He's here to help. And then check out his podcast. He's got a great episode. You may catch a collab from me on the way soon. So stay on the lookout for that. Absolutely. Yes, and now it's also social media time for the show. We're on all the platforms you like to use, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We're at A Mental Health Break. And on Twitter, we're at Podcasts by Lancey. So you have updates from all of my shows. My personal handlers are at Vincent A. Lancey on all platforms, as well as YouTube. And catch my website as vincentalancey.com. If you check out my books, take a picture and send it to me. I would love to share your support. I'm a 3-time published author, and my latest book is Mr. Lancey Talks Mental Health. Get them all on my website now. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you all on the next episode of A Mental Health Break.